Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Van Exen, and I'm GreenPAC's Executive Director. I'm just checking that the sound's working okay here. I'd like to welcome everybody, our audience and our panelists for joining us here today. This event is going to take a look at where the environment fits into the 2024 budget, which was announced by Minister Freeland on Tuesday. Um, um, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Bruce Power, IBC, and Power Corporation of Canada for supporting our work and making it possible for us to hold events like these. And I also wanted to let everybody know that today's event is being recorded. It will be shared with participants and available on YouTube after the event. Additionally, I think we all know how to use Zoom by now, but closed captioning is available for this event. If you require it, please locate the CC button, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, and select it. We're joining today from Indigenous land, all of us, across what's now called or so-called Canada. The land on which GreenPAC is headquartered is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas of the Credit. And I'd like to acknowledge my own, GreenPAC, and all of our responsibility to take action towards reconciliation, to repair the injustices faced by Indigenous people, and to uplift and uphold the leadership, stewardship, and sovereign rights of Indigenous people. If you don't know GreenPAC, we are a nonprofit and nonpartisan one that believes that the health of our planet should be a driving force in Canadian politics at all levels and within all parties. And our work focuses on building up that cross-partisan leadership. We have several hundred registrants today, so we are in webinar mode. That means that if you have any questions for our panel, you can share them using the Q&A feature. We'll pose as many of them as we can at the end of the discussion. And so now I'd like to turn it over to our wonderful moderator, Shakti Ramkumar, who's the Director of Policy and Communications at Student Energy, which is a global youth-led organization working with a network of 50,000 young people in over 120 countries to accelerate the transition to a just and sustainable energy future. Thank you, Shakti, and over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm so thrilled to be moderating today and to learning from our amazing panelists. So without further ado, I'll introduce our three wonderful panelists we have today. We have Kendall Anderson, who is the Program Director of the Equitable Transition Program at Pembina Institute. We have Alex Callahan, who's the National Director of Health, Safety and Environment at the Canadian Labour Congress. And we have Corey Diamond, the Executive Director of Efficiency Canada. I went through everyone's names and titles really quickly, and they bring decades of experience. So please do check out their bios on our Eventbrite. We're just moving ahead for sake of time, but I do encourage you to check them out. And just after the panel, we'll also hear from Andrew Van Eiderson, the manager of the Green Budget Coalition, who will be joining us partway through the webinar today. So let's dive into it. This budget has arrived at a challenging time for Canadians, particularly, but not only for low-income Canadians and for Gen Z, who are deeply concerned about housing, about jobs, and the cost of living. The budget also comes at a challenging time for this minority Liberal government, who's facing record low polling numbers and declining popularity around the carbon tax, which has been a keystone climate policy and one that they seem to be sticking with, as we've seen in this budget. So with this context in mind, and after a fall economic statement that focused on presenting a sense of fiscal restraint in a time of inflation, it's probably fair to say that no one was expecting the environment to be a major theme of this budget. Today, we're going to dig in and hear more from our experts about the measures and directions that this budget 2024 presents. So let's get started from the basics, and we'll hear from each of our three panelists for an opening question that looks at the budget's key themes and messages. So first, we'll go to Alex. So the fall economic statement that came earlier was criticized for lacking a cohesive theme. Everyone expected this budget to focus on affordability and housing and to be aimed at younger Canadians, and it clearly does. Are there other key themes or audiences that the government is trying to pursue through this budget?
Thanks, Shakti. It's very nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation. This is fantastic to participate in the discussion today. So the government has sent signals about who they want to be speaking with the budget, and it comes right down to the title, the fairness for every generation. I think the bigger question is, does it live up to that? Because I would say for folks who are expecting a pre-election budget, I don't think this is a pre-election budget. This is maybe setting the stage for a pre-election budget. But there is not a grand vision for what a low carbon economy and good unionized middle class jobs with benefits, with pensions, what the vision for that actually is. And I think that is actually like a very fundamental question that, I mean, geez, generationally, that this hits all kinds of folks. But frankly, if you're a millennial and you're looking, or a Gen Z millennial, you're looking at like, what does the future look like? Why can I be hopeful about the future? The government missed an opportunity to really start to set the to lay out a roadmap for where our economy can go. Where are the good jobs of the future going to be? Because that is a fundamental question, and it's a real uncertainty for a lot of people. Now, Monday, the Sustainable Jobs Act passed through Parliament. Now, it, of course, still has to go through the Senate. That is an area where hopefully we can start to see some of this vision fleshed out, the definition of sustainable jobs. And there's a good one, like talking about exactly what I just said, like good jobs with benefits, with pensions, these kinds of things. But that bill did not need to be passed to start some of that work. That bill is important for doing that work. But this budget was an opportunity to start to lay some of that track and didn't. And I think that's unfortunate. It's a missed opportunity.
Thank you, Alex. And I think what I heard from you is that the budget was a chance to provide a bold vision. And that brings us over to Corey. As we know, budgets are both policy and communications tools. Given how much the government has struggled to control the narrative around affordability, around the carbon tax, does this budget effectively connect the storyline between the cost of living and addressing the climate crisis? Do you see any new framing around climate issues in this budget?
Yeah, really good question, and thanks for that. I can't speak to all 400 plus pages of the budget, partly because I haven't read all 400 pages of the budget. But we've been saying all along at Efficiency Canada that there are very specific moves that the federal government can and should be making to both address affordability and climate issues. And so we've been working with officials across government, but mostly with Natural Resources Canada, and we focus on saying, okay, here's your contribution to both addressing affordability and climate. So here's something that you can do. And we've been focusing those efforts around supporting those who are living in energy poverty in Canada and supporting them and getting out of energy poverty through interventions related to energy efficiency. So we're happy to finally see that recognition. So that framing in at least that page or those few paragraphs is definitely there, that you can address both affordability and climate crises at the same time. And so they've put the money towards it. There's $800 million in brand new money. And I think what you'll start to see in the coming weeks is that framing. I was at a conference this morning at the Building Decarbonization Alliance. Minister Guilbeault was here, and he started to kind of use that framing, that we're helping the people that need it the most. We're making it easy for them to improve the comfort of their homes, to reduce their costs, and all the while helping to contribute to support Canada's transition to net zero. So I think you'll start to see that a bit. And before this budget, there really wasn't anything the federal government could stand on as far as supporting those most vulnerable. And so we're happy to see that 800 million in there.
Yeah, that sounds promising. And it's definitely a narrative that young people are very concerned about. Both issues need to be solved at the same time. Looking specifically at the environment and climate lens, I'll turn it over to you, Kendall. Are there any surprises or standout commitments in this budget?
Yeah, as you said, Shakti, and Alex and Corey have said as well, this is a housing and affordability budget, and probably we'll see another budget in before the next election. But it does try to address some of these intersecting issues like housing and good jobs and innovation, productivity, inflation, and climate change. They're trying to find those ways to have the multiple benefits from each investment. So I would call attention to a couple of things in the budget. There is a little bit of progress on the investment tax credits. Some of those are already in progress, and just as a bit of background, these are tax credits that businesses can use to help compete for clean energy investments, and those are also tied to good jobs and tackle climate. So they kind of do those have those multiple benefits. And then from the housing commitment, we joined Corey in being excited about those investments, especially for more vulnerable folks. But want to make sure that these houses are built right the first time so that they can decrease emissions, improve affordability, and increase resiliency. So that's going to really require relationships with the provinces as well to get that done properly. We were pleased to see support for young workers through the apprenticeship programs. We can talk a little bit more about, what kind of scale we needed and why that scale wasn't quite isn't quite where we need it to be. But and then the other things I would just mention is the Indigenous loan guarantees. So program, it's going to facilitate Indigenous ownership of major resources projects, and some of those ideally will be clean energy projects. So that's going to be that's an exciting opportunity for that's new in this budget. And then there's $1 billion in electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and that's going to, I think, really make people feel a little bit more confident about buying that electric vehicle. And we know that confidence is what's needed, even though EVs are really taking off. That we still need to see a lot more adoption.
Thank you, Kendall. And yeah, hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about these specific pieces as we go on throughout our questions. In our next question, let's keep the focus on affordability. So in this budget, what do we see in response to Canadians' cost of living concerns, and how does it address energy affordability? And how significant are these measures in lifting Canadians out of energy poverty? There's a lot of question in this budget and news I've seen online about the timeline of when Canadians will see these benefits. So if you could comment on any of those aspects, I'll ask Corey.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, there are people, we think there's about 2 million Canadian households experiencing energy poverty from our research. And that means those people are spending, less money on good things like food and prescription drugs and things because their energy bills are high because they're spending it on energy waste. So a targeted program will help those in need. And if you look at the universe of how much is being spent on those types of programs in Canada, this essentially doubled that investment so far. So it's big. How significant it will be? Well, that all depends on how the program is designed and when they can get it out. So, best in class programs from across North America, the best way to do this is to do it with partners on the ground in every region in the country. And we've got great partners on the ground who are doing this, and do it as a direct install. So there's no real lift on individuals to apply or to put upfront costs, and get local groups to start getting heat pumps and windows insulation, other measures installed free of charge. So I've been quite optimistic so far on this webinar and some of my discussions over the last couple of days. But 800 million sounds like a lot of money, but it actually isn't, right? Once you start spreading it across the country and spreading across all those measures. So how the design will work is going to be extremely important, and I know NRCan is going to consult with experts across the country to do that. So I guess the point is, let's use this as an initial investment and to get work done immediately, improve the case, and then we build on it. And when we'll see these benefits, they are top loaded later. So there is no money until 2025, 2026. But given how slow the machinations of government is to move money and to design programs, I don't think they could have got any money out the door this fiscal year anyway. So we hope to see something in market very soon, in the next fiscal year, which I guess would be April 2025, to get those programs out. And if they are done and designed well with existing programs on the ground from regional partners, then maybe we can get that done faster. The last thing I'll say is that the danger or the risk with a lot of this stuff and how long it takes to get out is that, yeah, of course, there's an election looming at any point. And so if you backload a lot of the spending later in the years, there is a chance this may not work, or may not ever see the day. So we'll continue to work with all the parties to make sure that they support this, so that if there is a change in government eventually, then this is one of the things that survives and grows beyond.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. Some really key points there, that the design of these programs will be really crucial to how effective they are, and then the kind of risks of delaying their start dates till after the election. And of course, there's been a lot of talk about Canada needing to close the gap between the promises we make on climate action and the progress that we really show on the ground. So Kendall, I'll come to you next. Does this budget get us any closer, or does it take us further away from achieving our climate targets? And how much progress do you feel remains to be made through other tools? And could you remind us of some of those big tools and that we might still expect to see before the writ drops?
Sounds good. Yeah. Yeah, we're, maybe 18 months away from an election, and the federal government has started a lot of really important work, and we need to get that wrapped up at this point. So some of the big ones that I'll mention is, when it comes to meeting our climate targets, we really need to rapidly cut emissions from heavy industry. And that's because heavy industry contributes so much. So a key one there is the oil and gas sector, which contributes 28% of the emissions. And the other one is our electricity sector, which really needs to be low carbon if we're going to get benefit out of our electric vehicles, and also if the Canadian businesses are going to stay competitive in a low carbon economy. So there are a couple of important tools that they're working on that we're really hoping that will get wrapped up before the election. So in the oil and gas sector, they're working on a cap for the emissions on the oil and gas sector, as well as methane regulations. And so these the oil and gas cap is really important because it gives companies certainty around what their emission limits are going to be. And so they understand what the rules are for the next couple of years. When they do that, we can see them starting to invest in the technologies and the workforce to reduce those emissions upstream. So it's big things like carbon capture technology, but it's also small things like basic monitoring, methane leak repair, that kind of thing. So, it's always hard to tell exactly how long this will take, but, at the moment we're expecting to see those in federal methane regulations, which is super important as one of the most important climate gases, or the most important climate gas, I guess. So we're expecting that to be out by the end of the year, and then the emissions cap will be mostly finalized by some point next year, but they are complex issues to deal with. The other one I'll mention is the clean electricity regulations. So this is a landmark regulation that's going to put a limit on the amount of emissions that are allowed in different parts of our electricity generation. But it also really accounts for important aspects around reliability and affordability of our energy supply. We don't want to lose one thing for the other. So both of these kind of regulatory sticks are matched with a carrot of investment tax credits. So they're really, these investment tax credits are there to support businesses and utilities as they make these changes. So we really need to see those regulations concluded, and then we need to see provinces and industry showing ambition and cooperating and trying to put these regulations into place around the country.
Thank you, Kendall. And I know some of these, definitely generated a buzz among young people in the media, especially the emissions cap. So thank you for pointing out those carrots and sticks. Next, we'll go back to Corey on energy affordability. So Kendall mentioned a few things that prioritize support for Indigenous communities, like the Indigenous Loan Guarantee. Does the budget have anything else that prioritizes the unique home energy retrofit needs of Indigenous communities and urban Indigenous people? And what are those?
Yeah, nothing I could see specifically laid out. Is pretty light on details on the retrofit side, but there's a couple of points or a couple of ideas that I want to put forward just to ensure that Indigenous communities can access that 800 million and that it's beneficial to those communities. The first is, we have to ensure that the program doesn't only fund energy saving equipment. Sometimes there are barriers for installing windows, heat pumps, insulation. We came out with a report last year that kind of shows that things like home repairs, mold removal, enabling technologies like panel upgrades and things, those are what's most needed so that you can then get to the installation of the actual equipment. So our recommendation would be that within the design of that $800 million program would be as flexible as we can on what it can fund, so that it's easier to get the installation of the end use product. So sometimes the federal government's role can be in just ensuring that. So that's one idea. The second idea is that that the program could work with Indigenous community administrators who can use energy efficiency as a way to avoid electricity cutoff. So sometimes if an individual cannot afford or is not paying their bills, after obviously a whole process and warnings and things, they're in danger of potentially being cut off. Well, energy efficiency is a way to slash that bill significantly and avoid that. And so we've been invited to work with the Ontario Native Welfare Administrator Association on seeing how they can design an energy efficiency program to reduce bills and then ultimately to avoid the high rate of cutoff. So that's another example of how this program can support and benefit, like in the design of it for Indigenous.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. The flexibility in what incentives are available for, and then measures to improve resilience as well. Thank you. Next, we'll jump right into our next set of questions, which is on a topic that's on a lot of people's minds, especially the youth that we work with at Student Energy, and that is jobs. We'll start with a question for Alex. So the government has faced a lot of criticism in recent months over the abrupt end to the Green Homes Granting Program, in part because the impact of those who work in energy auditing and in retrofitting. What kind of certainty does Budget 2024 send to workers, manufacturers, installers in various clean energy sectors?
So again, not as much as we might have hoped. Now, I will caveat this a little bit because I want to talk about the industrial strategy for home building. So we're talking about energy. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But the lead of your question was about the home grants. And so one of the things that the government did commit to here was co-developing or developing in consultation with labor unions an industrial strategy around home building. So why is that important? And first of all, when you're planning in a way that's tripartite or that includes unions at the table, you really get a sense of like what's the workforce that you're going to need, what are the training opportunities or training needs, frankly, to make sure that you have the workers ready to do that. And I think that frankly speaks to the question that I raised before, which is like setting out a bit of a roadmap for what we want our economy to look like. And so the fact that the government is engaging in some industrial planning around this is welcome. I think, though, it highlights the fact that this is actually a playbook that you can run in other sectors. It's something that we've been talking about, pretty regularly around sort of broader questions around clean energy or low carbon energy, which is what's the industrial strategy for what we're going to do. So Kendall actually made reference to the clean electricity regs, and for folks who've spent any time looking at the draft regulatory package, the government is actually setting out some estimates in terms of what, for example, they think the generation mix is going to look like, and what they think the consumption is going to look like. And they also talk about cost to the consumer and so on and so forth. But what they don't contemplate in as part of the CER plans is where do those workers come from? How do we make sure that those are good, safe jobs? So traditionally, public sector electricity and frankly, private sector electricity, where it's been privatized, they've been good union dense jobs with health and safety that come, like occupational health and safety levels are high, compensation is good. Like these are good jobs that people want to have. But the reality is you can't snap your fingers and create a power line technician or a red seal electrician or the kinds of people who can do all that work going forward, who have the recognized certifications and so on and so forth to do that kind of work. And so anyways, I think that is sort of an opportunity, like the fact that they're willing to engage on this home building industrial strategy really does sort of kick open the door to the fact that the government is willing to do some industrial planning around this, to set out goals for how we get there. And frankly, that can apply to our domestic energy consumption, but it can also apply to other sort of high value export oriented goods that that are frankly the kinds of high value added goods that we've built our the Canadian economy on, built good jobs, and creating a roadmap for those sorts of good jobs is part of the social license that underpins all of this work, right? All of our climate ambition is underpinned by social license, by people wanting to go there. And part of why people will want to go there is the opportunities, the fact that there is something good, better about this. Like, and so there is that is something that I think is missing, but there is a bit of daylight here that we can see, which is a good opportunity. I will also mention, and I think we may return to this, Kendall also referred to this as well, some of the clean investment tax credits, which have labor strings attached to them. So the government, in a fall economic statement, two fall economic statements ago, I guess, announced a series of clean investment tax credits with attached labor strings. And so what this meant was for the first time, in order to qualify for the full value of an investment tax credit, basically, if you invest in capital related to, this kind of capital, that kind of capital, whatever. So it's like clean manufacturing, electricity, carbon capture, hydrogen. You had to meet a labor standard. So you had to pay the equivalent of a prevailing wage. It said that you basically had to create a good job when you're doing this. And I think that is essential. Those are the kinds of signals that workers, industry need to see, that the kinds of work that we want to do are to create that good Canadian economy that workers can benefit from, that creates social license and that anchors communities.
Thank you, Alex. And I really like what you said about the social license kind of underpinning everything when it comes to climate action. It's very true. And I'll come to Kendall next. So many eyes are on the Sustainable Jobs Act that, as Alex noted earlier, has been passed by the House and moved into the Senate. Can you tell us more about whether we see commitments in this budget aimed at supporting a fair and equitable transition for workers, or does it look like we have to wait for the act to pass before we see that spending?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And Alex, I hope I don't repeat things that you've said before, but yeah, I just want to sort of remind people of what the Sustainable Jobs Act is all about. The energy transition to net zero is going to require a vast change to both lower our emissions and protect Canadians from the worst of climate change. So, but we really have to get moving on this right now. And, we keep kind of delaying and delaying. But we know that global estimates are that oil demand is going to peak before the end of the century. So the good news for us for Canada is we have a lot of the ingredients already in place to take advantage of the net zero economy. We have technologies that are ready to deploy, with EVs and heat pumps that are more and more trusted. And we have a really well-educated workforce, and in many provinces that we have a clean grid as well. But we need to, make those connections, as Alex was saying before. We need to have that sort of plan in place to get our investment, or sort of to get our workforce to the place where they can retrain and reskill to take up these opportunities. So in terms of spending around sustainable jobs, no, the government has not waited. They've started in terms of those investment tax credits that Alex mentioned. That there's quite a lot of money backing that, and they've now just put forward a new one, which is about to support electric vehicle manufacturing. So, and they have these good jobs and apprenticeships attached to them. We also have seen that the Sustainable Jobs Fund, which was the Sustainable Jobs Center, has begun to deliver some reskilling, but only recently, only in this last quarter. And only a portion of the money too. So we really need to sort of see that money kind of start to roll out. But the important part is that the Act itself provides that framework for labor, industry, Indigenous communities, and civil society to really connect and understand what's happening at the community level, where are the investments that provinces and regions want to make, and how can workers be at the table so that we can build that, maybe a social license or political will to make the big changes that we need to see when it comes to climate. So we're really hoping the Act is going to receive royal assent from the Senate by June, so that the work can really begin. Because as Corey mentioned, things take a long time in the government, and so just to get the council up and running, and starting to hear from workers and communities, that's a really important step that we want to see starting in the fall.
Thank you, Kendall. And I think that's a great point about the Act being, something that can provide a lot of clarity for organizations that are working directly with community, with workers, with future workers who have a lot of questions about what sustainable jobs might look like in the future and how they can get them. So yeah, thank you for that. Next, we'll talk a little bit about innovation and what this budget has to do with innovation. So we'll start with Alex. So a lot of the pre-budget messaging from the business community focused on the need for more government action to stimulate investment and productivity in Canada. Building on what you've already told us, how does this budget work to ensure that Canada doesn't miss any opportunities to be a key player in the clean economy and ensure that we don't lose young workers to other jurisdictions?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I did mention I think the most substantive thing that they've actually put pen to paper on were those clean economy ITCs, which are meant to sort of stimulate growth in those particular areas with the conditionality that they are creating good jobs. Because the reality is, like, there is something that actually, Shakti, you identified, which is worth thinking about, which is the potential to lose people to other jurisdictions. Like, we are not going to be the only country that's trying to electrify and decarbonize our electricity grid, for example. It's not as though there's some money in here for foreign credential recognition, but the reality is it's not as though there's going to be an infinite supply of people who have these skills. Like, we are going to need to invest in skills and skills training. And there's been some good steps into what's called the UTIP program, where, we are looking for, again, some clarity about where the economy is going, ideally bargained with workers, so that then we can make sure that the skills are there for people to match to go into those things. Because, like, yeah, that demand for skilled workers in key sectors. So, for example, electricity is a perfect example, is going to be really high. We are going to be competing with other countries. And so part of that is actually some other positive steps that we're taking, pharmacare, childcare, things like that make Canada an attractive place to, to continue to live, like make it the place that, like, we all really love to call our home. But, is also making sure that, people have, that the jobs in those sectors are in fact good jobs.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And really ties back to our earlier conversation on affordability and how measures on those front are really so crucial for these sustainable jobs as well, and getting people to stick around. We'll go to Corey next. So to transition our economy and meet our climate goals and create good, clean jobs, we need a net zero emissions electricity grid that's based on renewables. In this budget, do we see investment or other measures to address generation, transmission, and electricity demand? And how will this impact meeting our climate goals either way?
Yeah, and Kendall mentioned some of the stuff. There's details on the investment tax credits that were announced, and we need to build out this clean electricity grid. So it's more of like, okay, what's the next step in making that happen and getting those funds to the provinces? One thing we're really tracking and looking at is to see whether or not you can tie those investments to all cost-effective energy efficiency. And it just makes sense. If we are spending $20 billion on investment tax credits to build out a clean electricity grid, we should be reducing demand as much as possible, as much as we can do feasibly and cost effectively, and you don't need to spend as much to build out. So we're really looking at that, and that's sort of the way that we're tracking around how that can impact climate goals as well. So just a quick response to a very complex question and issue.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for that start. We'll come back to Alex on this one. Another tough question, but what does this budget say about who should benefit from the clean economy? What kind of balance does it strike between the interests of businesses, workers, and low-income Canadians?
I'm going to sound like a broken record today, because I think we had been hoping for more on this. And I think that's the kinds of things that we want to have at the discussion we want to have, for example, around the Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council, is how do we make sure that there are opportunities for people who have traditionally not been part of, the energy sector, for example, or good manufacturing jobs as our economy decarbonizes. So there's room to start to answer some of these questions, I think, but frankly, that I expect will happen more around the work that the Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council and hopefully the Sustainable Jobs Action Plans get into. And this is something that the budget frankly could have dug into and didn't. There are some positive signals, but again, this budget is not answering that question.
Great, thank you, Alex. And the next question pretty much is related to that. We want to hear quickly from each of our candidates. What are the gaps? You've touched on a few of them already. What are the gaps? What are one or two things that you hope to see in this budget that aren't there? And we can popcorn style, so anyone can chime in first.
I'll jump in and say I had hoped that this budget was going to set a vision for what we wanted Canada's clean economy to look like in 5 years, 10 years, and the kinds of, what that means for then how we can, how we can make sure we have the skilled workers, how we can bargain towards those kinds of things, how we can make sure that we have that we're building that economy on good jobs. People don't want to see the quality of their work degraded. They don't want to see fewer opportunities than previous generations. They want to see how they can be part of this and what the economy looks like, and then how they can have a part of that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we mentioned the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program earlier in the session, and one of the challenges that we recognized in it is that it's for major projects, so it may not actually, like, we want to make sure that it's designed so that it can actually make sure that remote communities have a chance to eliminate their reliance on diesel, and that this may not fit in there. So that's maybe not a missing piece, but like a slice of what we would have liked to have seen is a chance to support remote communities get off the really expensive and unclean diesel. That's one.
Yeah, and I'll quickly go. So, $800 million for linking climate affordability is great, but it is a backslide on investment in energy efficiency and retrofits. The Greener Homes Grants program was a $2.6 billion program that was not renewed. So we were hoping to see both a renewal of that and a low income program. So, and the federal government, along with the countries of the world, got together at the last COP and pledged to double energy efficiency and triple renewables, and here we are sort of investing less on the retrofit side and on efficiency. So it's not necessarily commensurate with the need of what we need to do to eliminate emissions from buildings and the government's own emissions reduction plan. So we were hoping to see more than just the low income program in it, but alas, that's where we are.
Great. Thank you, Corey. And just a reminder to everyone, I already see some great questions coming in the Q&A, but please feel free to ask your questions. You can also upvote other people's questions if you like what they asked. So please do use that feature. We'll have some time for questions for all of our panelists at the end. Next up, I would love to introduce Andrew Van Eiderson to join us. Andrew is the manager of the Green Budget Coalition. So Andrew, could you take us a minute just to tell us about the work of the Green Budget Coalition?
Sure, and thank you so much for inviting me to join you. I really appreciated the discussion so far. The Green Budget Coalition was founded in 1999. It includes 24 of Canada's leading environmental and conservation groups, everyone from Greenpeace to Ducks Unlimited, including the Pembina Institute, the David Suzuki Foundation, Nature Canada, and CPAWS. We focus on the federal budget because the federal budget is usually the most important federal document of the year for the environment and other issues, but also the hardest influence. And we operate on an annual cycle that starts really now for next year's budget and includes consultations with national Indigenous organizations and also over 15 different federal departments and agencies. And I'll just conclude by mentioning we've been told by Finance repeatedly that we are the best stakeholder to the Department of Finance.
Amazing. Thank you, Andrew. So in this conversation, we've talked about housing, affordability, jobs, and energy so far, but we haven't talked about conservation, agriculture, or many other environmental issues. How did they fit into this budget?
Question. I mean, on conservation, it's maybe a good news, bad news story. A year ago, we were really hoping for a huge investment in nature conservation coming out of the Nature COP in Montreal in December 2022, and the government decided at some point in the past year not to do that, and we're hoping for that next year now. But on the other hand, there were some really important investments in 3 new national parks, the National Park Reserve and PEI, the Great Bear Central Coast National Marine Conservation Area Reserve in BC, and the Ojibwe National Urban Park in Windsor. Collectively, there's about $210 million for those. There's another $160 million for national parks infrastructure. On sustainable agriculture, however, there was nothing really notable at all, so we were disappointed about that. A couple other pieces we saw, there was sunsetting funding for the chemicals management plan and pesticides management and monitoring, and there was new money for 2 years for those. However, marine spatial planning funding was sunsetting and there was no new money for that. A couple little things that were mentioned in the budget are important, but sort of small steps on a new green core and progress towards the circular economy. The government's going to move towards consulting further to make progress on those.
Great. Sorry, I thought you were going to say something. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, and I think it's just a stark reminder that the climate crisis is really made up of so many environmental issues. And while we may talk about, energy the most, there are so many of these others that we can't overlook. Thank you for that. So as some of our panelists mentioned earlier, at most, we're about 18 months to when the writ drops for the next election. What might we expect from the government's game plan to look like in terms of getting where it wants to be on the environment before then?
Imagine I'm going to duplicate some of what you've already heard on the panel, but I imagine one of their key steps is implementation. They have a real, I think, public reputation of having announced a lot of money, but not necessarily delivering. And so they'll want to deliver, but also be seen to deliver, and on areas like retrofits and electricity and sustainable jobs. And I think a key piece for the environment and good financial planning is that all the hundreds of thousands of new homes they want to see built are built as efficiently and resiliently as possible. For us, a key piece we're looking for is that big investment in nature and biodiversity conservation. The National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan has been promised to be released in June. And also the UN Biodiversity COP16 is coming up in October and November. So we're hoping the plan will be released. There'll be big money announced, hopefully, as something that Canada can proudly announce or brag about at the COP. But there's a number of areas on sustainable agriculture, sustainable jobs, environmental justice, where we're waiting for this sustainable agriculture strategy to be completed and then funded, Sustainable Jobs Act to be completed and funded, and the environmental racism and environmental justice bill similarly.
Great. Every COP sneaks up on us quickly. So thank you for drawing out that timeline for us in the next few months here. So final question for you, Andrew, is just briefly, the budget is a cycle, and you know that process better than most of us. So what happens now? How do we engage and advocate to make sure that budget 2025 is one that puts health of our planet front and center?
Good question. I mean, there's multiple sides to what happens now in government. Many government officials are now focused on figuring out the details of what was just announced, and we're working towards implementation and getting funding approved by the Treasury Board. For the coalition, we've already started identifying what our recommendations are for next year, many of which were recommendations that we did have for budget 2024. Our authors will be reaching out to government officials and checking in about what the best, most beneficial thing we could be asking for is and how much money to ask for. And the Green Budget Coalition's, I would say, weakness and also the opportunity for progress, and where everyone on this call could help out, is on putting public pressure on government to take action on ensuring those acts and strategies are approved and that funding is announced. And that cuts across nature, buildings, electricity, sustainable jobs, environmental justice. I also hope we can, I think more broadly, there's a concern within government that support for Canadians for ambitious environmental action is decreasing. And to the extent that everyone in all their communities can help build that support back up, that's a really important piece. And when we're advocating for new funding, we need to keep in mind there may be a conservative government on the horizon. So ideally, funding can be structured in a way that it's not vulnerable to being cut. And similarly, it's really important for everybody in their communities to be reaching out to MPs and conservative organizers and building support for them for stronger environmental action. I heard that at the recent Canada Strong and Free conference from Boris Johnson and others, the Conservatives were told repeatedly that they need to take action on climate change and environment. So we need to echo that message. And lastly, the provinces, territories, and municipalities are also important pieces of progress on climate, and there are many pieces that only they can do, and so we need to pressure them as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. And it's just a reminder to all of us that, announcements, commitments are a great starting point, but they do take active engagement from all of us to make sure we see them through to the end. Next, I'll invite our three panelists to join Andrew on camera so that we can get into some questions from the audience. We have some great questions in the Q&A already. Of course, please feel free to keep adding and we'll get to as many as possible. So we'll start with this question that I think a few of our speakers touched on today. Were any of the programs to reduce emissions, the cap on the fossil industry, methane and electricity regulations, even mentioned in this budget? And I know, Kendall, you touched on this a little bit earlier, so if you want to provide a quick answer to this, maybe I'll turn to you and then other panelists can weigh in as well.
Yeah, thanks. In terms of a mention, I'm not really sure actually if it was specifically mentioned in the budget. because a lot of this is already sort of underway, and they often want to. But as Corey said earlier, it is 400 pages, and so yeah, I'll have to double check.
And maybe I'll ask a related question if people want to weigh in on both. Is do you have a sense on why the budget did not include a windfall profit tax on oil and gas? What negative impacts on Canadians might have persuaded the government against including it? And the floor is open to anyone.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on those policies, but I'm sure everyone on this call has seen how much of a fight each one of these issues is, and so I think what the Liberals were trying to do with this was to kind of take the baton back from the opposition on these issues, like the fighting on carbon taxes and other things, and put a more of a leadership positive spin, which is we're going to address affordability. If they had come out with one of those things, you could expect that would have led to significant blowback, and that would have been taking the shine or spotlight away. So that's likely. I'm sure it's all politics and communications driven. So why, but I don't have any real insight. That's more just an idea.
Okay, next question is, we've seen quite a lot of movement around the country in support of a youth climate corps, and we saw a similar announcement being made in the United States. Was there any consideration given in this budget to a youth climate corps as part of the Sustainable Jobs Program?
I can jump in on that one. Yeah, it is mentioned in the budget. They do say that they're going to be beginning consultations on it. So it is sort of at an early stage. I don't know that they would necessarily, call it a sustainable jobs program, but I think it's an exciting opportunity for young people who care about the climate to be sort of directed towards jobs that are specific to, helping with our climate crisis. But I also think, we should be thinking about multiple different kinds of jobs as being climate jobs. When you think about, electricians, if they're doing work around, electrifying space, like their climate work, those are climate jobs too. So really want to encourage a broad understanding of what counts as a job, as a climate job. But the Youth Climate Corps could kind of get people excited and find a place for some of that energy that we see in young people for climate. It could be a great opportunity. So I look forward to getting involved in those.
Well, I think frankly, there's going to be a question about that, which is the training and experience that people get through a program like this going to actually lead them to something else? Are they going to get training that's going to be recognized? Are they going to be fairly paid for their time? If you're part of a youth climate corps, is this going to be the kind of thing that helps you, live in the city where you're going to live to do this work, or the community that you're going to live to do this work, maybe save some money for something else? Or is this going to be counting on people to volunteer their time? And I think, this budget is framed up as fairness for every generation, and to frankly be fair for every generation, it's going to have to depending on what this youth climate corps looks like, people will have to be fairly paid. Just because you're young doesn't mean you should be taken advantage of, right? You shouldn't be. You should have the right to be fairly paid. You should have the right to make sure that you're safe on your job, that you have good health and safety training, that if you're being asked to do something that you don't understand or you think is unsafe, you say no. That's a fundamental right that every worker has. And this is not this is something that I think is going to have to make sure we fit into sort of the larger the world of work, because our future has to get built on good jobs in a net zero sector. And I think that for a youth climate corps to succeed, it needs to answer some of those basic questions. And I think that's that's an important question to ask going forward, because I don't think that young people should be taken advantage of because they because of altruism.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alex. It's definitely of great importance to a lot of young people, many of whom can't really afford to take time for unpaid internships or upskilling or all these things that youth want to do. They want to be ready for these jobs, but if they take 2-3 years of unpaid work time, it's not really feasible. And youth will choose to move on.
It goes somewhere. That the training
Exactly.
you receive takes you to somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sometimes where the opportunities aren't where young people live, and there's no real pathway or connection for youth to be able to connect the skills they have with actual jobs. So there needs to be maybe not a guarantee, but something close to it, for youth to feel a little bit of certainty.
I said, why not have a guarantee at the other end
Why
of it?
not have a guarantee? That would be even better. Thank you. Another question is open again to the whole panel. Can you tell me about what the budget proposes with respect to changes to the Impact Assessment Act and how it responds to the Supreme Court's earlier ruling?
I don't know that, isn't that being dealt with through legislation?
I think there were a few measures in the appendix, but I'm not highly familiar with them. So it's just a step.
All right. And and we have a couple more questions in the Q&A here. So given the climate crisis, what actions will be taken in support of local food security?
I'm gonna pass, not my area of expertise.
No, me neither. I mean, I do know that we were looking for some support for sustainable agriculture, Andrew, but that we didn't see much of that in the budget. So that's not necessarily about food security, but that kind of question of, how do we make food in a way that is going to help with the climate rather than causing more problems.
I just did a quick find on Google and in the document, so I'll put that in the chat. At the bottom of page 140, there's a section on it. I don't think it details much. Yeah, there's some money, so I'll put that in there and you can have a look at it.
Great, thanks for doing that, Corey. Next question, maybe it's a little bit more on Canada's role in the global climate action progress. What money will be allocated to support the most vulnerable nations to be partners in dealing with the climate crises? Is there anything about that in this budget?
I don't think there's any new money in this budget. I understand that Canada's current funding for international climate finance and international global biodiversity both sunsets in 2026. And our hope is Canada's hosting the G7 in 2025. And so our hope is to encourage and inspire the government to make major announcements in 2025 to extend and raise Canada's contributions in those areas.
But Andrew also mentioned earlier the next COP coming up. And so my understanding is that COP29 is there is some discussion about it's going to be a finance COP. And so some of the, there may be new targets and what have you coming out of that. But that's probably a question outside of the budget cycle here.
Great, thank you for that. A question we just got in, a new question from the audience. Does anyone have an inclination on how the retrofit upgrade program would be delivered to low and mid-income homeowners?
Yeah, so I covered this early on. And if you go to efficiencycanada.org, we have a whole section of our website on how to best implement these programs. So if we get our way and the design is commensurate with what others have done in all jurisdictions, there's a few key parts. One is that it will be a direct install program, so there's no upfront cost or any cost to individuals. Number two, that it would use regional players on the ground who already have programs in market and relationships, so they know where the most vulnerable are and can immediately get programs to them. Plus, it complements an existing program, so you can do additional things. And then the third thing is what I said earlier around non-energy upgrades, which are oftentimes a barrier to getting things like heat pumps and windows and insulation installed. You might need to support that. So those are some elements. But again, go to our website, you can kind of see what we're advocating for, and we'll continue to work with experts across the country to work with NRCan on the design of it. But that's what we hope to see and how it would look.
Great. Thanks, Corey. And we have a question here that maybe I'll broaden a little bit. The question is, how can upcoming graduate students or current students who are seeking internships effectively engage with opportunities in their field. And maybe I'll just broaden that to ask, what can young people be doing right now, graduate students be doing right now to be a part of this, the measures that are included in the budget, just of the clean economy in the future? Any advice you have for young people who might be listening?
Well, I'll come back to a point that I made earlier, which is I think this is where folks, like where labor in my instance, but I think broadly speaking, are looking for policy signals and direction about a version of industrial planning is going to look like. So we have a sense of what is coming down the pike. What are the industrial sectors or the economic sectors that the government is interested in focusing on? I mean, we're effectively like, it's like Kennedy in 1963. We want to go to the moon before the end of the decade. We want to meet our climate targets. Well, you don't just sort of put that goal out there without some guidance about how you want to achieve those things. So, I would encourage people to, there is we have skilled trade shortages. Now, I know the question was specifically about, graduate students. But and there's a lot of companies are investing in decarbonization. But I would encourage people to think very seriously about the kinds of trades jobs that are going to be involved in a low carbon economy. Trades jobs are good, unionized jobs. You can with a certification you can move around the country. And they are good jobs that pay for a house and keep your kids, you have the dental benefits that keep your kids in braces when they need them, and all those kinds of like things that people just want in life.
Yeah, one practical thing at Efficiency Canada, we often look for wage subsidies for youth, and we've worked with Eco Canada for many years. In fact, I was an Eco Canada youth myself. I'm not going to tell you how many years ago, but yeah, and so there's opportunities to sort of show up with to a job posting or to a job ad with that subsidy, so you can get pre-approved to bring that subsidy. So check out Eco Canada. There's others that flow from the government's youth internship programs or wage subsidy support. So it's always a good idea to go out, find those, and then when you're in the job hunt and when you're in interviews, you could say, I've been, I'm part of this and I can show up with that. So it's we've seen that happen sometimes with some of our interns. And one other thing, just to plug, at Efficiency Canada, we have a job board, and on that job board is just energy efficiency jobs across the country. There might be entry-level jobs that might be working for you, so have a look at our job boards. Over 200 jobs available. It's free to post a job too if people are looking for you.
This is slightly tangential, but it kind of builds off a point that Kendall made earlier, which is I would encourage people to think about the ways in which, for example, the care economy are low carbon jobs. They're inherently low carbon jobs, and education, public sector work, like a lot of these things are inherently low carbon jobs and good jobs.
I'll just flag that the Green Budget Coalition usually has been hiring a summer student once we hear about our funding, which is often like at the very last minute. I imagine other environmental groups are too, and we love to have people who are passionate and keen and interested to learn. It's a great opportunity.
Yeah, the Pembina Institute also loves to host interns, and they're paid interns. And I want to double down on what Alex said, which is that young people should be paid for their work and respected for their work. So yeah, that when you are out in the hunt, remember what your worth is, and don't yeah, make sure you're paid it.
Love to hear it. That is an excellent note to end on, Kendall. Thank you so much for that, and for sharing the opportunities as well about upcoming jobs that you may have at your organizations, and for Corey for mentioning the wage subsidy programs. There's Eco Canada, Electricity HR, I know, has a wage subsidy program as well. So please do check those out. I personally benefited from them, and I know so many young people who have as well. So thank you again, Alex, Andrew, Corey, and Kendall, for a great panel today. And I just want to thank you so much for breaking down the budget for us in such an accessible way. As you mentioned, it's a 400-page document, not something that is easy to parse through, but I think we learned a lot today from your expertise and from your interpretations of the different pieces of the budget. So thank you again, and I will turn it back over to Sarah.
Perfect. Thank you, Shakti, and thank you to all of our panelists. I know you have had a very busy couple of days trying to get through those 400 pages and deal with the media, and really grateful for your insights and, as Shakti said, your ability to break it down. Shakti, amazing job moderating. We're so glad to have you here again this year. We were talking about internships, so I'm just going to put a plug in that GreenPAC partners with a new charity that we recently helped to launch called Environmental Leadership Canada. We run our own paid internship program, which places young environmental leaders with MPs working on environmental issues or senators on Parliament Hill. It's a 10-month experiential leadership and learning program, so I'd encourage you to check that out. So to everybody who came today, I'd like to thank you. Please take a moment to share your feedback to guide our future events. I think my colleague Raymond's going to drop a link into the chat that you can use for that. Thanks to our sponsors. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Please take care.